What if I told you that a 32-year-old man conquered an empire the size of 5.2 million square kilometers, or for you Americans, 2 million square miles, basically a lot of space. And then, just like that, the world conquered him? Let's talk history while watching completely unrelated footage, just because I don't know how to edit a video. But don't worry, I promise you'll understand history like never before, or maybe even like it, probably. Alright, listen up. A 20-year-old walks into the room. No, not some TikTok star. I'm talking about Alexander the Great. He's just inherited a little kingdom in Macedonia. And what does he do? Well, instead of going to Ibiza for a gap year or binging Netflix, this kid decides, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna conquer the entire world. Yeah, just like that. No big deal. You think your life's a mess? Try being a teenager with the world's fate on your shoulders. At 20, Alexander didn't just want a kingdom. He wanted everything. He wanted to blend the East and West, mash them together like a confused smoothie, and oh, while he's at it, let's make sure everyone thinks he's a god. But here's the twist. You know that whole great thing? Everyone calls him Alexander the Great. But what if he wasn't so, well, great? What if this whole thing was more about ego and delusion than brilliance and destiny? Is there more to the story than we're being told? But before we get lost in all the power moves and questionable decisions, let's rewind and take a good look at where this insanity began. How does a kid go from playing with toy soldiers to actually leading an army across continents? Grab your popcorn. This one's a doozy. Alright, buckle up, because we're about to take a journey into the mind of a kid who was basically born with a crown on his head and a massive chip on his shoulder. Picture this. It's 356 BCE, and in the dusty hills of ancient Macedonia, a boy named Alexander is born to King Philip II. Now, Philip wasn't exactly a nice guy. He was the kind of king who built an empire and pissed off a lot of people in the process. But hey, that's what kings do, right? So here's the thing. Alexander's dad was busy conquering stuff, probably too busy to read bedtime stories, so Alexander spent a lot of his youth being told that he was destined for greatness. Yeah, that sounds healthy, right? I mean, most of us are lucky if we get good job stickers in school. Alexander, he got told he was the next big thing, you know, like a Marvel superhero with a serious superiority complex. But wait, it gets better. Who's his personal tutor? None other than Aristotle, the Greek philosopher who literally wrote the book on philosophy and science. Imagine being a teenager and having one of the smartest men in history teach you everything from ethics to biology. I barely managed to get through high school maths without Googling everything. Now picture this. The kid spends his days pondering the meaning of life, the universe, and why men just love to wage war, all while Aristotle's probably like, Alexander, don't forget, world domination requires good leadership and understanding of human nature. And Alexander's sitting there thinking, sure, Aristotle, whatever, but how do I make my empire really great? That's right, his education wasn't just about philosophy, it was preparation for total domination. Aristotle might have been all about ethics, but Alexander, he was all about the power moves. You can almost hear Aristotle sighing every time he talked about the virtues of being humble, while Alexander sat there imagining himself on a golden throne, probably expecting a crown to appear just for breathing. But here's the kicker. Alexander's not just some idealistic teenager full of big ideas. Oh no, he's got the genes for it. His dad, King Philip, was a military genius himself, so Alex learned how to fight before he learned how to spell philosophy. At the ripe age of 16, Alexander was already out there commanding troops, running his own campaign while his dad took care of other things. Talk about a family business. Now, I know what you're thinking. Great, he had a rich dad and a super tutor. Big deal. Fair point. But here's the thing. That mix of education, power, and zero humility, that's what gets dangerous. When you're 20 and have just inherited the throne after your father gets assassinated, it's the perfect storm. He's already got the brains, the training, the military skills, and now he's got the power to do whatever the hell he wants. And that's where things started getting dangerous. All right. Now that we've established that young Alexander is essentially a walking disaster waiting to happen with a chip the size of the empire he's about to build, let's dive into the mess that was his campaign against Persia. You ready? Because this guy didn't just conquer land. He bulldozed through history like a 2-year-old with a tantrum and an army. Picture this. It's 334 BCE, and Alexander's standing there, 20 years old, the Macedonian army at his back, and he's looking at the biggest empire in the known world, Persia. And he's like, yeah, that'll do. I'm going in. No hesitation, no second guessing, no plan B, which, spoiler alert, is never a good sign in the middle of a world-conquering spree. His first battle? The Battle of Granicus. He goes up against the Persians like he's just casually taking out the garbage. Boom, decisive victory. Easy. A few hundred Persian soldiers who didn't get the memo about not messing with Alexander, and he's already on his way to becoming the hottest name in world domination. But here's where the stakes start to shift. Darius III, king of Persia, the guy who probably should have been sitting pretty in his palace instead of getting ready for war, hears about this 20-year-old upstart and has a mild freakout. Darius tries to rally his forces, but let's be honest. He's about as prepared for Alexander as a one-legged man in a kicking contest. Fast forward to 333 BCE, and they meet at the Battle of Issus. And if Darius thought he was going to show up and go, "I'm the king of Persia, bow before me," well, he was in for a rude awakening. Alexander? He's too busy wrecking everything. The Persian army gets smushed, Darius takes one look at the carnage, grabs his royal behind, and legendarily runs the hell away. How's that for leadership, eh? Darius just left his own men to die in the dust. Classic bad guy move. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, sure, the guy's good with a sword, but what's the big deal? Oh, it's a big deal. The big deal is, Alexander's now convinced he's not just a king, he's a god. Yeah, that's right, buddy. He starts pulling the whole son of Zeus thing. Because what's a world-conquering ego without a divine origin story? And the crowd's eating it up. Because what's better than having an immortal, unstoppable, walking myth leading your army? Nothing. Fast forward another year. He's wiped the floor with Persia, and now Egypt's like, sure, come on in, we'll crown you pharaoh. Why not? So what does Alexander do? Strut in, get crowned, and then adds God King to his resume. Why not? You're probably thinking, this guy's a walking PR campaign. He's invincible, right? Sure, he looks invincible. But remember, no one stays on top forever. Eventually, the cracks start showing. He starts pushing eastward into the Persian heartland, and that's where things start to get really, well, sticky. Because here's the thing. You can defeat armies, sure. But when your soldiers are exhausted, mentally broken, and tired of hearing you proclaim you're the son of Zeus, that's when things get real interesting. Alexander's men, after years of grueling campaigns, are standing at the gates of India, staring down a massive army of war elephants. And let's face it, no one's ever seen an elephant in battle before. It's pretty terrifying. But here's the real kicker. They don't want to fight anymore. They've been marching for years, and suddenly they turn on him. They refuse to march any further. Oh, the irony of it all. The unstoppable force finally meets its match in the form of human exhaustion. You'd think by now the guy would have figured it out. But nope, he's like, I'm pushing forward. But his troops, they're done. So Alexander, in a rare moment of self-awareness, decides to take his defeated soldiers back home. Yeah, back to Babylon. Because why continue marching towards a new world when you can just head home and die a few years later? This is where it all begins to come undone. You thought he was unstoppable, right? Well, turns out Alexander's human after all. And that brings us to the last leg of his campaign, the one that's going to change everything. And everyone. But before we go there, here's the big takeaway. It's not just about a guy pushing an army across continents. It's about willpower, charisma, and the insane audacity to think you can shape the world as you see fit. The same stuff we still see in geopolitics today. Think about it. The drive to dominate, the belief that you can change the world in your image. Sound familiar? It should, because we're still dealing with it. And the worst part? It's not over yet. All right, let's hit pause and do some time travel, shall we? Hold on to your seats, because this whole East versus West thing, yeah, it's not just a fancy phrase from some dusty textbook. It's still playing out today, and it's very much part of the daily headlines. Remember how Alexander thought he could glue the East and West together, like some sort of ancient hipster trying to blend sushi and pasta? Spoiler, it didn't exactly go to plan. And here we are, centuries later, still trying to pick up the pieces. Flash forward to the present, and the legacy of Alexander is as alive as ever, only it's a bit more complicated. In a world where power still hinges on East versus West, his quest for a unified empire is a vision we can't seem to shake off. Take a look at the Middle East. The borders there were shaped directly by the aftermath of Alexander's conquests. He waltzed in, spread Greek culture like it was free Wi-Fi, and boom, the region never really recovered. The ripple effects of that, we're still dealing with them today, from the Ottoman Empire all the way to today's power struggles. And don't even get me started on the 21st century's spicy international tensions. You know, that whole US versus China rivalry? The one where both sides are still playing the who's the boss game, like two kids fighting over the last cookie? Well, newsflash, Alexander might as well have been your referee. His obsession with creating a global empire, That mindset got passed down like some kind of imperialist family heirloom. Every empire since then, Rome, the British Empire, the US, has had that moment where they thought, why not us? We could do what Alexander did. I mean, who doesn't want to be the next world power? Hash goals, right? Only as we've learned, world domination isn't as glamorous as it sounds. Turns out, it tends to come with a lot of bloodshed, conflict, and trying to teach people who hate each other to suddenly get along. But it's not just political. Oh no. The cultural impact? Well, let's talk about that. Remember how Alexander mixed Greek culture with the East and created the Hellenistic age? A huge chunk of the world's philosophical and scientific foundations, like the very stuff that built the Western world, can be traced back to that sweaty dream of his. Greek philosophy, art, language, it spread far beyond the Mediterranean, influencing places like India, Egypt, and even China. You can almost imagine Alexander doing a little dance of victory as his ideas spread like a meme across continents. I'm the god of culture too. But as anyone knows, imposing culture on others can get sticky. Take the modern world, where cultural imperialism is a hot-button issue. We've got Western countries still trying to spread their values, sometimes to places that don't quite want them. We talk about it with a little more nuance today. Oh, it's called globalization. But deep down, it's still rooted in that same imperial mentality. Remember the scramble for Africa in the 19th century, and how Western ideas infiltrated indigenous cultures? Yeah, this isn't just about soldiers on horseback anymore. This is the same attitude, except now it's more polished. It's in boardrooms and behind tech giants' closed doors. So when you see, say, American or European culture everywhere, from movies to social media to fashion, remember that Alexander, for all his blunders, set the groundwork for all of this. He didn't conquer the world just with his sword. He also conquered it with his ideas. Now let's talk borders. There's still the mess Alexander left behind. His empire was so vast that within a few decades of his death, it fragmented like a bad Tinder date. The Diadochi, his generals, fought like it was Black Friday for territory, leaving a broken empire that, over the years, solidified into the political and cultural zones we now recognize as the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and South Asia. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and the same regions are still rife with conflict, division, and instability. Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, does it ring a bell? And the most ironic part? All of them are rooted in a legacy that began with a guy who, for all his unite the world talk, never really got the memo that unity was easier said than done. Sorry, mate. And the grandest part of it all? Alexander's failure to maintain the empire that he built was an omen. No empire, no matter how powerful, can hold it all together forever. So when modern powers look at these regions and try to impose their will, they're essentially stepping into a trap. They might dominate for a while, but sooner or later, the empire crumbles. The US has learned this with its own entanglements in the Middle East. Russia's going through its own version of this lesson. Spoiler, just because you try to unite the East and West doesn't mean it works. The imperial dream still manages to slip through our fingers. So here we are, still wrestling with the ghosts of Alexander's empire. The tension between East and West, it's not going away anytime soon. Still bleeding from it, still paying for it. And if you think that's wild, oh, wait till you hear what happened behind the scenes. Alexander's god complex, the great betrayal of his closest generals, and one very mysterious death. Now that's some juicy history. Oh, you want the spicy bits? Buckle up, mate, because this is where it gets wild. So let's start with the fact that Alexander literally thought he was a god. Yeah, you heard me, a god. Imagine being so full of yourself that you start having statues made of yourself in Egypt, and then you're like, nah, let's take it up a notch. I am Zeus' son now. Yeah, right. This isn't the ancient world's version of a drunken tweet, though. This was more like a global PR campaign. He told everyone he was the offspring of Zeus, because if you're going to conquer the known world, why not sprinkle a little divine blood in there for extra pizzazz? I mean, what's the harm, right? Might as well make the entire ancient world worship you while you're at it. Just classic megalomania. Nothing says I'm a good leader like divinity complexes. But hold on, it doesn't stop there. The guy started demanding people bow to him like he was the second coming of, well, himself. His men were either in awe of him or plotting to stab him. Imagine having that kind of power trip where half your army is ready to crown you the next god and the other half just wants you dead. What a vibe. If you think that sounds dramatic, well, it absolutely was. These weren't just regular soldiers. This was a bunch of battle-hardened warriors who'd seen everything. And yet, there was Alexander marching through Persia like he was on some world tour with his ego as the headline act. Oh, And don't get me started on how he was divinely inspired when he slaughtered his own men in that temple. Total God move, right? And speaking of his world tour, let's talk about the U-turn in India. After winning a huge battle at Hydaspes, against war elephants no less, let's pause and appreciate that level of badassery. His soldiers said, you know what, we've had enough. That's right. They just said, nope, we're done. Imagine the audacity of saying, nah, we're not going any further. After marching all the way from Greece to India, the soldiers rebelled and forced him to turn back. Classic Alexander. After the entire world has bowed to you, your army says, okay, no thanks, we've gone far enough. And what does he do? Marches them back to Babylon. That's some ultimate petulant child energy right there. They just crossed the entire known world, and their boss was like, fine, whatever, I guess we'll head back then. But let's talk about the big one, his death. Because of course, with all his godlike delusions and world conquering, you just know it was going to be a bit dramatic. Some historians believe Alexander just succumbed to a fever, maybe malaria, maybe typhoid. But some ancient sources have a spicier take. He was poisoned. Seriously, imagine leading an empire that stretches from Greece all the way to India, and then, in a cruel twist of fate, you die mysteriously. I bet someone in his court was just waiting for their chance, right? No one thought, hey, maybe we should keep this guy alive just a little bit longer? Apparently not. Could you imagine the scene in the palace? The great Alexander lying there dying with no one willing to admit it was them who slipped the poison in? Even for ancient times, that was some next-level treachery. And that, my friends, brings us to the ultimate twist. Alexander's death left his empire in shambles. Oh, the irony. The great conqueror, the man who never stopped moving, who was always thinking bigger, better, more, died young, without a clear successor, and poof, his grand empire was divided up between his generals faster than you can say tactical disaster. And what did they do with all that power? The classic post-Alexander fallout. The Diadochi went at each other like hungry hyenas fighting over scraps. You ready for this? No? Too bad. Because here's the real kicker. What he left behind didn't just fall apart after his death. No. It still haunts us today. His dream of East and West blending into some glorious united empire never happened. Instead, we're stuck with an ongoing East versus West showdown in every corner of the globe. The lines he tried to blur with a god complex are still fighting it out in our geopolitics. The West wants to dominate the East isn't having it, and we're left trying to pick up the pieces. It's like we're stuck in a rerun of a show that ended 2,000 years ago, but we can't change the channel. So, yeah, Alexander the Great, he might have been one hell of a conqueror, but he left the world fighting over his leftovers. And that, my friend, is the real legacy of his god complex. And that brings us to the ultimate question. Was Alexander really great? Or was he just an ancient man-child who happened to conquer everything within a 10,000-mile radius? So here we are, the ultimate mic drop. Alexander's dream to conquer the world turned into a 30-year-long rock tour across continents. But here's the kicker. When the curtain fell, it wasn't the empire that made it. Nope, it was his legend. Let's break this down. His empire didn't last. It collapsed faster than a cheap IKEA bookshelf. Seriously, he died at 32, and by the time his body cooled, his empire started disintegrating into bits and bobs. Those famous generals of his? Yeah, they fought each other for the leftovers like starving hyenas. And why? Because Alexander the Great was too busy thinking he was literally a god to make any solid plans for his empire's survival. You know, small things like governance, stability, or maybe leadership after death. But no, he didn't need that. I'm a god was his answer to everything. Could have just said, I'm invincible, nothing can stop me. But that's about the extent of the foresight here. Maybe he was right, in his own twisted way. Who knows? Here's the thing, though. Despite the mess his empire became, Alexander's legacy still looms large. The man might have crumbled, but his idea didn't. That whole East versus West thing? It's still the basis for the global stage we play on today. The cultural collision he tried to create is still unfolding in geopolitics, trade wars, and religious divides. He thought he was uniting the world. Turns out, he just set the stage for a game that's still being played today. So here's your final thought, your takeaway. You can have all the grand ideas in the world, march to the beat of your own drum, and conquer literally everything. But eventually, the world gets bored, and it chews you up. Empire building? It's easy when you've got an army and a god complex. But when you're gone, well, that empire, it's only as strong as the people holding it up, and they're all going to squabble for power. So yeah, sleep tight. History's still out here biting people.